Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Tonight we're going to be talking about merchandising. Now, merchandising is something that we are all familiar with. It affects various areas of our lives. But for tonight, we're going to be talking about, merchandising primarily in the music industry and primarily in rock and roll. But all of what we're going to be talking about tonight could apply to other artists as well. Now, with rock and roll more or less starting off in the year 1955, okay? You can give it a couple of years prior to that with some obscure, true rock records, but with Rock Around the Clock and Bill Haley in the Comments, we had our first true monster rock hit. Any merchandising done with those acts up until about 1964, and we're going to get to that, was all done rather naively. It was a brand new business after all. The merchandise was the damned record that put them on the charts to begin with. And everybody thought, well, that was an end to that. But then, like I said, 1964 arrived, and four cheeky young men who collectively were known as the Beatles arrived in America. Now, to Americans, these were overnight sensations, but this band had been together for years and had already taken England by storm, absolutely owning that country on the charts. But not even the Beatles, who were professionals at this point, could have even began to guess at just what would sell in their name. It wasn't too long before we were inundated with Beatle products, from Beatle wigs to Beatle boots, and all of these things were priced. Beatle lunch pails, right? Beatle bubble gum. You could buy bubble gum and get 5, count them, not 4, but 5 trading cards. And all of this was covered under a license underneath the Beatles company, and all of this was managed by Brian Epstein. Now, I've said this many times before. I think Brian Epstein, up to this point, is rock and roll's most brilliant manager. He discovered them. He cleaned them up. He made them presentable. He sold door to door to get them their recording contract. And he failed at that time after time after time, but his perseverance got him right there. His upper class upbringing gave the Beatles a real shine that none of their contenders had. And you know what? It was good for the Beatles because he rubbed off on them and they rubbed off on him. And just to get the Beatles to the point where they arrive in America, Brian Epstein should go down in history as the greatest manager of all time. But he was limited. You see, he didn't think that what they would sell in America would amount to a hill of beans. Just give me a few cents off each item and we'll be happy. The Beatles lost millions upon millions of dollars over that mishandling. And for the most part, up until the late 60s, so did every other single band. But they were all on the bandwagon. They were selling merchandise. But something in 1969 that happened that seems unrelated at first, actually I feel is quite related to the problems we face with merchandising today. You see, most people will tell you, well, the reason t-shirts and mugs cost you so much more today is because of inflation. Then why is it that when Alan Klein started to work for the Beatles, he demanded 20% when Paul McCartney just knew he'd shut up and take the job for 15%? This was a source of contention between McCartney and Lennon over this whole thing. Of course, history would eventually bear out that McCartney was in the right, with the other Beatles even admitting that in the end. But here's the thing. Back in the early 60s, managers were paid 10%. And guess what? Managers were getting rich off of 10%. All right, so with all of that in mind, I've always believed that the artist should be the one who makes the money off of the merchandise. The merchandise is based on who they are, perhaps their image, if not their actual image, perhaps their album artwork, or whatever. It should remain in their hands. Now, I found an interview with guitarist Dino Cazares. He's the guitarist with the rock band Fear Factory, and he was talking about some of the problems that the band has incurred post-pandemic. In other words, ever since the venues started opening up, some of the things that the band has to contend with. He says, it's kind of just like life in general. Anybody who has a normal job. You're still getting paid $10 an hour, but your rent went up, your insurance went up, food prices went up, gas prices went up, but your pay is the same. It's kind of like that now, and it's been that way for bands for a while. Now, he goes on to say, promoters are only willing to pay you so much, but everything else went up. Now the club owners and the promoters are taking a cut of your merchandise. So it's making it harder and harder for artists to survive. Asked if the merchandise cuts that the promoters are taking from artists are getting larger than they were in the past, Dino said, yes, that's been the whole debate. It's been getting larger and larger. Of course, there's always been a percentage that you had to give to venues. That's just how it is. Merch percentage. It's getting higher and higher. So unfortunately, the fans are the ones who have to pay for that. Of course it's the fans. And that's why, and only one of the reasons, I make reports on these kinds of things, because it always gets down to us, doesn't it, folks? Now, the article goes on to point out that some venues are charging as high as 30%, with 20% being the old norm. I can tell you 20% was nowhere near what any venue got for Led Zeppelin. As a matter of fact, back in those days, merchandise belonged to the band, and the venues are just like those managers I talked about who started asking for a larger chunk of an already finite pie. And every single time, folks, that one of these vampires sinks their teeth into that limited pie, it's always the artist at first who suffers, and you and I as an audience second. Now, did this urge from these venues come out of greed? Yeah, probably. But there's also been some pressure put on by the very artists themselves, and I'm talking about the big ticket item artists. We're talking the Paul McCartneys, the Bruce Springsteens, okay? When they tour, they just let everybody know what they want to make this year, and everything gets trickled down into the piping of the system, the venues being the third system of pipes. We've talked about this. There's the artist, then there's Ticketmaster, who talks to Live Nation, who owns or has control in some way of 90% of the venues on planet Earth. It is the artist's desires, what they think they ought to make, that really supersedes everything else and has every single thing to do with increased ticket prices. So don't let them sit there and bitch and moan in interviews complaining how they're all victims of Ticketmaster. Bullshit and a half, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video tonight. If you did, give it a thumbs up, please. That helps with channel growth, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel as of yet, I say it every time, don't I? But I'm gonna do it again. It is easy as hitting that subscribe to the tribe button and then tapping that top bell icon, and then you'll be notified of all my future videos. And there, it's a done deal. All right, I'm Michael Noland, and together, folks, especially in the comments, we become a tribe. We have a voice. We are the tribe. I'll see you in my next video.